Good evening. My name is Joost Ouendag, and tonight we have a special episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. And it's really special just primarily for me because we're talking about the Tulips and Windmill cruise today. And that goes primarily through the country that I'm from. So I get to talk about my own country, my own people, my own food. And that has me a little bit more excited maybe than normal. You may have seen me on previous episodes. If I get a little carried away, just remember that this is, if I'm a little critical about the Dutch, that's very much a Dutch trait. That's what the Dutch do about themselves. And I once heard someone describe that in a very nice way. He said the Dutch are so critical outwardly about themselves and about their country and about everything that goes on in their country, because deep down in their little hearts, they're so convinced that, Holland is the best country in the world. And there may be some truth to that. So let's get started with Tulips and Windmills. It's a round trip to Amsterdam, 10 days, two countries. It's not just Holland, it's also Belgium. And we'll get to Belgium also in this. But let's start with, two little pictures that show you where I grew up or give you a sense of my Dutch roots. That's the picture on the left. That's my mother and my four brothers and I. I'm the kid in the middle with white blonde hair. And then on the right-hand side, that's a picture that's on the same vacation. It's all in 1968, so it's a while ago. And this was in Zealand. They were just building some of the constructions that you will now be able to see when you visit the Netherlands. They were still under construction. And four brothers. That's how we went on vacation. We would always go to the coast. It was kind of my father's thing. It was like, if I haven't seen the ocean, and we call it the sea because you're in the North Sea. If I haven't seen the sea, I haven't been on vacation. Let's start off with a little video that gives you an idea of what the cruise is like, and then we'll delve into the explore more the pre-extension packages right after that.
This 10-day cruise gives you the Netherlands with a taste of Belgium. Begin in Amsterdam. Then see the medieval city of Bruges and the diamond capital of the world, Antwerp. You'll also enjoy small Dutch towns like Hoorn, as well as the beauty of Keukenhof Gardens and the old-time windmills of Kinderdijk.
Okay, that was just to give you a little bit of an impression. I actually was with the gentleman who made the drone footage that you saw. He flew over some of these church towers, and it was great fun to do. We start off talking about the extensions first on this cruise, and you fly into Amsterdam. Obviously, you get there relatively early in the morning, just because Amsterdam is one of those cities that's in the western part of Europe, and mostly you will be there before noon. And then you have two options to spend an additional few nights in Amsterdam, which I would recommend because it's such a great city. It has so much to offer. You can stay in what we would consider our Viking style hotel, and you can up it a little bit. You know that on the ship you also have these choices of different staterooms, and we decided in Amsterdam to duplicate that principle, that you have more than one option. So the hotel in the premium extension is a little bit nicer. It's a little bit more expensive, of course, and the included services are a little bit more bespoke, if you will. One way or another, it's a great way to see a little bit more of Amsterdam. My eye is caught by the last three words in the Amsterdam description, Anne Frank House. Perfect. If you want to see the Anne Frank House, book 2 extra nights in Amsterdam. Go on the Anne Frank website, Anne Frank House website, and book your own ticket. We cannot necessarily do this for you. It's way easier to do it for yourself. The Anne Frank House likes to work with individuals rather than with organizations like Viking, and it's very easy. It's in so many languages. It's easy to do, and it's much better than to show up and just chance it, because that may not work well. Especially in summer, it's a place that a lot of people want to see, and there are long lines quite often. Okay, then let's start with a map of the Netherlands, and this gives you a bit of an overview. You will also see a bit of a limitation of the kind of maps that we normally show you that show you a good sense of what the rivers are like. In Holland, the rivers are everywhere, and that is making it a little complicated to show you exactly where we're cruising, because sometimes it differs a little bit depending on the time of the week. Sometimes certain locks are open and sometimes certain locks are closed, and that all happens mostly during the night. So it's not that it affects anything that you do during the day, or it doesn't affect anything that you see, but it sometimes just changes a little bit your actual routing. And then when you get to Zeeland in particular, and in Ghent, so that lower left-hand side of the image, you sail through quite a few canals. Some of those canals are just like you would imagine a canal, land on both sides as far as you can look. And then some of these canals are clear across an island where some of those canals are quite wide. It's a very unusual experience to have. Especially in that southwestern corner of the Netherlands, to be cruising. You will have, at some stage, you will have a canal that you're going through with the river ship, and then there's a dam, and on the far side of the dam, you will see ocean ships, because they all are headed for Antwerp, and you're in your own lane, and then the ocean ship, which looks bigger and which tends to be a little faster, is in its own lane. So it's a very, very interesting experience. And then when you get to Amsterdam, there will be river ships, but there will also be tiny little boats with families in them, and they tend to be the kind of ships that zoom. You know, it's like the small little Fiats that you see in Rome on the big squares. Those small little ships that dart around everywhere. Because they can, and because they're small and agile and nimble. And of course, because there is so much water, the Dutch tend to take to the water at every opportunity that they get. The cruise starts in Amsterdam, goes up to Hoorn, then through the night ends up in Arnhem on the eastern side of the country. And after a visit to Arnhem and its environments, it goes downriver again. You wake up the next day and you see the Tulips Windmills. Then you're headed south to Antwerp. After Antwerp, you go to Ghent, which is where the ship docks. And then from Ghent, you travel overland to Bruges. And then in the evening, again, you leave Ghent, you travel through Zeeland, you end up in Rotterdam at the end of the day. And from Rotterdam, you make your way back to Amsterdam. So that's in a nutshell what you will experience on this cruise. And then we're talking a little bit about the kind of experiences that you will have. The Viking way is our way of explaining or showing you the destination. And it works as follows. We want you to have a sense of what the people in these countries are like. And there's no better way to do that than to just go into their houses. So in Hoorn, part of the included excursion is that we take you into a normal Dutch home. And over the years, we've established a network of very ordinary, very friendly Dutch people. And you will just experience what it's like to have coffee and a piece of cake, or coffee and what we call a koekje, a little cookie. And you get to talk about whatever you want to talk about, ordinary, everyday things. The working world that we show you is basically, the concept here is, what do people do? How do they make a living? What makes this country tick? What's important? What's the economy like? And there are bits and pieces of that in Holland that I always think are really interesting, because on the one hand, you'll have something like this Delft pottery that goes back to the Dutch Golden Age, which was the 17th century. So it's hundreds of years of tradition. But it's still also a very modern way of creating pottery and creating beautiful pieces in blue and white primarily. Windmills, on the one hand, are these iconic machines that go back centuries. At the same time, you will see in the Dutch landscape these massive wind turbines. And we will take you into one of those turbines, and we will show you a farm that has one of these wind turbines. Tulips are iconic in the Netherlands. In the working world, we show you what a working tulip farm is actually like. And it's not the Dutch girl in traditional dress that goes out and picks the tulips. It's a machine. It's very interesting, but it's a very modern, well-oiled machine. And of course, over the years, we've developed relationships that have allowed us to offer you things that you cannot get on your own and that you would not be able to get in any other way but with Viking. In Kinderdijk, for instance, we have sponsored the construction of a big chunk of the new visitor center. And in return, we have access to one of the windmills that normally remains closed. And we get to that windmill by a little boat that we helped refurbish. As you can imagine, for hundreds of years, the canals in Holland were really where you had to take you around. So there were boats everywhere. There's roads now, and roads, as in many other big European urban centers, are clogged. But back in the day, when these roads were soggy and wet and not very comfortable or reliable, people would travel by boat. And so we got one of these boats from the 19th century, had it converted, and it now carries passengers from the visitor center in Kinderdijk to that very special windmill. So we provide you with privileged access in some of these places, and essentially it's from us to you. It's our relationships, and we benefit from those relationships in that we can offer you things that are quite unique. What is important to think about when you choose your excursions is to pace yourself, to understand, quickly what's what a little bit. And this is why we have this list of icons that you will find in the descriptions of these shore excursions. In particular, it's important to understand what's easy, what's moderate, what's demanding. It simply helps you to pace yourself a little bit. And my experience is that on some days you will want to be on the go, and on other days you might want to take it a little easy. And so that is helpful to have an activity level that you well understand and that's easy to interpret. All the rest of the icons more or less speak for themselves. So let's dive into it, shall we? Let's start with where the cruise starts in Amsterdam. And as I described, you land in Amsterdam usually in the morning, even if you do not book your 2 extra nights in Amsterdam before you get started. The fact that you get there relatively early means that you should try to make the best of that day. 2 reasons. One is you will be less jet lagged if you don't go to sleep right away. And second, it's just such a phenomenal city that you want to spend as much time as you can on foot, I would say, or on the tram to get to know Amsterdam. And on that first half day or so, just go out and walk. Maybe what you need to do, depending on where the ship is docked, you will probably want to jump on a tram. Those are easy, those are safe, those are what everyone else uses, and they will get you to the center of the city. Amsterdam is compact, it's relatively small. And once you're in town, you can just start to walk. It's a beautiful city to just get lost in, because around every little corner you will find something that is fun, that is interesting. The Dutch overall speak English very well. There's not really much of a language barrier. The only barrier that you will have in Amsterdam is the bicycle barrier. You just need to grow a set of extra eyes in the back of your head. Amsterdam is a city with a lot of young people. It has 2 universities, so there are a lot of students, and bicyclists more or less own the roads in Amsterdam, and they take no prisoners. It's not dangerous, it's just a matter of making sure that you look around you a little bit. You need to be a little bit more aware of your surroundings in Amsterdam than in some other cities, because the bicycles, as I mentioned, they're really everywhere. This is a cafe. I need to mention this because I did it in a different episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. The cafe that you see in the middle of the picture with those beautiful orange lights is Het Papeneiland. Best apple cake in Amsterdam. Lots of whipped cream, lots of apples. Also a place where you would go for your jenever. Jenever is Dutch gin, and the way that you drink this, and I do digress a little bit, I apologize, but the way that you drink this is they will pour it into this little glass and they will put that in front of you on the counter. And then it is entirely appropriate to kind of stoop down and slurp the first little bit of gin out of the glass. It's the only way to drink it without spilling it. It's just the way you do it. And it's fine to slurp a little bit. To spill it is something else, because the Dutch are frugal. They don't like to waste things. So keep that in the back of your head. Okay, and then from Amsterdam, where in the full day that you have there, I would recommend that you go on this orientation city tour that is half city tour and half canal cruise, and it has to be, because the canals are really the best way to see Amsterdam. After that city tour, you'll have a half a day, and again, spend as much time as you can pounding the pavement and looking at the place. This is a picture by Jan Steen in the Rijksmuseum, which is kind of the vault of Dutch history and Dutch art history. And Jan Steen was one of the painters of the Golden Age. I love his paintings because they're so disorderly. And what he's trying to explain in this painting is that what this couple in the middle is doing is actually not entirely appropriate. They should be more like the people in the background, the people that are dressed in black and that are reading the Bible, and the lady that's sitting there half asleep, who is quietly contemplating life. So Jan Steen is trying to warn for a life that is too loose and too fancy-free, and not spending a lot of time on religious thought. And the funny thing is that it's clear in the painting that he is of split minds, because he paints this happy life with such incredible gusto. His are some of the great paintings in the Rijksmuseum. Of course, there's a Night Watch by Rembrandt, but there are a lot of things that will surprise you. It's this vault of everything Dutch over the last, about the last 1,000 years or so. So it's a great museum to spend an afternoon in. There are other museums right next door. You could also, if you wanted to, because you're coming back to Amsterdam at the end of your cruise, you could save that for the end of the cruise, and you could go to Delft. And in Delft, we will take you to the Porseleinen Fles, which is one of the last remaining Delft blue factories. You will see how this is made. It's all done by hand. It's painted by hand. There are people in these studios with, modern studios where they have big magnifiers that allow them to paint very, very, very delicately. And you'll get a very good impression of how it's done, also of the history of Delft blue. You'll have some time to wander around Delft itself. Beautiful city. Has a magnificent church on the main square where all of the royalty is buried. And you'll also have a chance to obviously take some of this Delft blue home. The hand-painted stuff is actually surprisingly expensive, I need to forewarn you. It's also a place where you can get an easy souvenir for the kids back home. Once you're back in Amsterdam, you have some time, and then the next day, or actually through the night, this is when you start setting sail for Hoorn, which is a city just to the north of Amsterdam. And Hoorn is lovely because you will be on the ship, and you see this tower in the picture, and you're going to be almost next to that tower. The ship really kind of sails into this old 17th century port that hasn't really lost a lot of that flavor. So we walk you into town, you visit with the people of Hoorn, and in the afternoon you have a handful of other things that you can do. You can visit this modern tulip farm and see what a wind turbine looks like on the inside. You will again meet the families that live on these farms. You also have the opportunity to perhaps see a little bit more of the countryside on a bicycle ride. And to give you a sense of what you do when you ride a bicycle, we have a slide here that will show you what the Dutch landscape looks like. So that this is downtown Hoorn. Again, if you don't feel like doing something in the afternoon, you could just sit on that in that building, that's a cafe now. It's the old scale building. It's where they would weigh pretty much everything. And today it's the most popular cafe in Hoorn, and you can just sit there. It's great people watching. You're smack dab in the middle of town. Hoorn is very compact, so it's a very, very easy place to get around. Maybe a little bit of idiosyncrasy. Oh, that's a good picture. Love that. That little boy, that's my son. He got lost that time in the tulip fields, and he's a lot bigger now as these things go. I'm sure you can relate as a parent. You know, oh gosh, he was just so fun and so cute. And he loved the tulip fields. This is a few years ago. And then the next picture shows you that landscape. This is what a bicycle ride in Holland looks like. Incidentally, that gentleman on that bike ahead of me, that's my brother. That's one of the kids that you saw in the black and white pictures. My little brother, who by now is also in his 50s, but I still call him my little brother. Hoorn is a perfect place to do the bicycle ride, and I'll explain to you why you want Hoorn and not Amsterdam to do a bicycle ride at the end of this slideshow. You can get a regular bike or you can get an e-bike, and as long as the weather is nice, there is nothing better than to experience the Netherlands like this. And this is not just outside of Hoorn, it's a little further to the north, but much of Holland looks like this. Flat as a pancake, and if you look very closely, you can see that some of the land in the left of this picture is lower than the water in that canal. And that does not bother anyone in Holland, because we all know that the land quite often sits lower than the actual water. That's what you have the windmills for, to keep the water out. And today, of course, these are no longer windmills. They're big, magnificent pumping works that pump the water out. But it's always there, the fact that you live below sea level. About 2/3 of the Dutch people live below sea level. Okay, so that's Hoorn, and then through the night we travel to Arnhem. And this is a very odd picture, but it kind of goes right to the heart of why you're in Arnhem. Arnhem was a crucial location in the Allies' plan during the waning days of World War II. This was actually in 1944, when the Americans were already in France and where they were making their way up towards the Rhine. And the idea was during Operation Market Garden to cross the Rhine, both in Nijmegen, a little further to the south of Arnhem, and in Arnhem itself. And they threw the first battalions of Allied fighters out in the dark of night from planes. And so these are sculptures that you can see in the main church in Arnhem. It's a modern piece of art, if you will, but it reminds people of basically the events that were immortalized in Attenborough's movie A Bridge Too Far. The entire episode did not turn out well for the Allies, and it actually probably prolonged the war by months, very harsh months for the Netherlands in the winter of 44 to 45. And that's what the included tour in Arnhem focuses on, to tell the story of the people that fought in Antwerp, in Arnhem, that lasted much longer than anyone would have expected them to last. But it was ultimately a somewhat failed mission. You will get an entire overview of the different movements in the battle. You will visit the airborne cemetery. It's kind of an all-around package, and there is not a particular battlefield per se that you get to visit because the Battle of Arnhem took place all over the city. This is also why you see an awful lot of modern buildings, because the city was virtually destroyed in the process. The church they had to rebuild. There are some other historical buildings that survived, but a lot of it had to be redone after the war. Arnhem is also a great place if you want to have a little bit of a flavor of what the Netherlands looked like 100, 200, 300 years ago. The Open Air Museum, and if you travel very early in the season, the Open Air Museum may still be closed. So if you see these images and you're like, oh, I really, really, really want to see this, check with the call center to make sure that you pick a date where this is already open, because it's right around tulip time, and we'll get to tulip time in a little bit, but it's right around tulip time that they open this open air museum. And it's a phenomenal place to get a sense of traditional arts and crafts in the Netherlands, really all the way to what the Netherlands was like in the 1950s. It's really it gives you a very broad overview of various different things. This is a blacksmith. There are lots of people in the village. It's buildings from all over the Netherlands that were brought here, and it's this little village, and people still present all these different crafts that were important back in the day. There's a beautiful old building that is very, very long, and this is where they used to make rope. So they would braid these long ropes. So the building is just very, very long, and that's one of the places where you can actually try your hand at doing your own rope. It's quite fun. Arnhem is also on the edge of Antwerp. It's kind of this mecca for people that are into modern art, because just north of Arnhem is the Kröller-Müller Museum. It was a lady by the name of Helene Kröller-Müller, who inherited a great deal of wealth from her father and who began her private art collection. And she was very, very interested in Vincent van Gogh. And out of this private collection eventually grew the second largest collection of works of Van Gogh in the world, right after the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And if you really enjoy Van Gogh, it's worth going there. It's also a place that has phenomenal sculptures. It has one of the stipulations that Helene Kröller-Müller had when she bequeathed her art collection to the museum is that she did not want it to grow, because she felt that what she had put together was just about perfect. And the kind of the workaround that someone found that was later in charge of curation at the museum was that they built a sculpture garden around the museum, and that sculpture garden is world class. It's absolutely world class. It has Rodins. It has Thomas More. It has a Jean Dubuffet. It has a beautiful Jean Dubuffet sculpture that you can actually walk into. So it's absolutely worth an afternoon in the Kröller-Müller, especially in good weather. And then we also there offer you the opportunity, because as you can see in the background, you're in a forest here. You can also rent a bicycle here and go through one of the few areas in the Netherlands that has some hills. So this is where the e-bikes come in really, really handy. If you have a little bit of a hill, you can, kick in your e-bike a little bit and still make it up the hill as you did when you were 22 years old. After Arnhem, you sail a little bit down river again, and this time you cruise on the Waal River, which essentially is a distributary of the Rhine, but in Holland we like to call it the Waal. And then once you're on the Waal, you kind of have to turn a corner again into yet a different river, and then eventually you end up on the third river on that morning, and that's the Lek. And then on the Lek we dock the ship. You walk across a dike, and this is where you will see the windmills. It's one of those things. It's just such a very iconic Dutch landscape. This is another gentleman who's kind of a friend of Vikings. This is Björn. He is the miller in Mill 1, and he's always a good sport. This was done many years ago when we asked him with a film team to set up his sails. And what was interesting is that you can really see that this is a machine. I mean, you look at a windmill and you think, oh, that's very cute and it fits so nicely in the landscape and it's so picturesque. But they're also just these massive machines that in this case Björn needs to run. The millers live in these mills, and part of their rental agreement, if you will, is that they have to run the mill a number of hours every year so that the machines don't rust, if you will. Of course, they're made out of wood primarily, but there's some metal to it, and to just maintain them. They need to maintain them and they need to run them. And Björn is one of the millers who runs way more than the hours that he absolutely has to, because that's just what he likes to do. He also runs his mill when it's he's relatively young compared to some of the other millers, and so he likes to run his mill fast. Okay, and then after Kinderdijk, I'm moving too fast. One of the things, of course, that the Netherlands is known for is cheese. And in and around Amsterdam, you'll have plenty of time to buy cheese in all shapes and sizes. What we decided to do for you, and again, this is the working world principle, we wanted to show you, and this is the easiest way for me to put it, we wanted to show you a farmer who has cows, who makes cheese, who sells his cheese to a cheese store that my mom would go to buy a piece of cheese. And she would normally go to a place that has these big wheels, as you can see at the top of the image. Those smaller cheeses that you see in the basin, that's, by the way, water and salt in that basin. It's how you give flavor to the cheese. Those smaller cheeses are somewhat of a novelty. This is not how Dutch moms would feed their 5 kids cheese on their sandwiches. You need a big cheese and you get a quarter of that, and that will last you for a week. So we wanted to have an authentic working cheese farm. And this one is lovely because it has really warm people. You will want to wear good shoes because it's a farm and there's a little bit of mud, and they have a beautiful dog that's happy to see you. It's really, what we wanted to show you is a piece of Holland here, and that's what you get. And this is something that you can combine with your visit to the windmills. After Kinderdijk then, we do a lot of sailing in the afternoon on that day, and you'll go through all kinds of intricate lock systems in the Netherlands. And those are mainly to keep the water where it needs to stay. And not on the land. You don't go through locks as you do on the Main River, for instance, where you need to go up into the landscape. Throughout your entire journey in the Netherlands, you're kind of you're either on sea level or a little below sea level in some cases, but you're not climbing up or down through those locks. You really move through these locks that manage to keep the water where it needs to be in the North Sea and not so much inland. Antwerp is the second most interesting city, I think, of Belgium. Maybe it's I'm a little, I really like Antwerp. I should say it's my second most interesting city. It's Brussels is certainly also very, very interesting. But Antwerp you can get to, you dock right on the river, and this is the great cathedral, which is very unusual. The Netherlands do not have a lot of these enormous cathedrals. This one is magnificent. It has 2 triptychs by Peter Paul Rubens, the great master that was kind of this incredibly iconic, most important painter in the Low Countries during the Baroque era. They're right there. They're Louvre art level paintings. They're enormous, and they're the pride and joy of the cathedral in Antwerp. It's also a city, of course, where you would need to try chocolates and French fries. French fries that the Belgians really discovered and invented, not the French. It's very much a city of the sensual pleasures. Food is important. Drink is also important. Do not leave Belgium before you taste some beers, and don't just have one beer. Have several. This is at Gravensteen, and this is the old castle of Antwerp. It's right next to where the ship docks. This is just to give you a sense of how close in town you will be. Great place to just walk off the ship or to go on one of the guided excursions in Antwerp. Next day from Antwerp, you will travel, waffles. The next day you will, it's fine. We can talk about waffles for too long maybe. So the next day you will get to Ghent. And Ghent is a great city in its own right, but we use it quite a bit as the main jump off point to bring you to Bruges. And Bruges is such a fascinating place because It didn't fight a lot of wars, and at some point in its history, it lost a lot of its natural harbor. And that meant that Bruges kind of got stuck in time in the 17th century. So it is probably the best preserved of any city in the Netherlands that you could visit. It is like an open air museum, but with lots of people in it, with lots of life in it, with lots of canals in it. And it is, I always find that to many visitors, it's their favorite city in all of Belgium and the Netherlands. The reason, by the way, we sometimes forget that there's a good chunk of this itinerary that is in Belgium. And the reason why this does not look all that different from the Netherlands is because Belgium and the Netherlands were one country until 1830. It's a long story that we will not get into, but that's kind of the explanation. This was all one contiguous country, and much of its history is shared. So Bruges is one option that you have from Ghent. Another option, and this is kind of an extended option, is we will take you. This is Bruges, by the way, and this shows you one of the really spectacular canals. This is a shot that's done at sunrise. So it will be dramatic, but not quite with that kind of light. It will be quite dramatic, Bruges. It has a lot of these views. This is another one. One of the things that you can do, and that's kind of a special interest excursion that we offer, is we can take you to Flanders Fields. It's in the south of Flanders. It's a bit of a drive, but this is where some of the most pitched battles of World War I took place. And all around the city of Ypres, there are very solemn reminders of this, whether it's the Menin Gate, where every night they blow taps to commemorate the soldiers that fell here. You will go to some of the cemeteries. You will see where the Canadian doctor composed his poem in Flanders Fields, and you will see some of the trenches, and you will get a real sense of just how terrible that war was for these young men that spent weeks and months in these trenches in the soggy Belgian soil. It's quite impressive. You know, it's a bit of a drive when you go back from Flanders Fields to Bruges, and people tend to be a little quiet and contemplative when they return. It's very, very impressive. After our time in Belgium, we then go back to Zealand, and this bridge is simply called the Zealand Bridge. And when you look at older maps, you will see that Zealand is a number of islands with in many cases more water. In many areas there's just way more water than there is land. All of that has been consolidated, all of that has been connected, and in many places the amount of water that can flow inland through these inlets, through these bays of the North Sea, is controlled by dams that can be closed if necessary during high water. All of this goes back to the terrible tragedy of the winter of 1953 during a spring flood, when much of Zealand was covered in water. And at that point, the Dutch said, okay, we don't want this ever to happen again. And actually, frankly, ironically, up until that time, this was something that was just par for the course for the Dutch. To be flooded and to have to rebuild everything, that was kind of something that happened every 30, 40, 50 years. In 1953, the Dutch decided that they wouldn't get it, that they were not going to have more of it. And so they have this very intricate system of dams and dikes, and that's part of the experience in Zeeland on this day. You will also have a chance to taste some oysters as long as they're in season. And that is highly recommended. They're small. They're not as big as some of the oysters that you get in other places in the world, but they're quite good. They're quite tasty. And of course, they're super fresh, because Zeeland is one of the places where we still have oyster banks that we can reliably get our harvest from. And you end that day in Rotterdam. Rotterdam, that was quite terribly destroyed during World War II because it was a port city. It was very, very crucial for the war effort. And Rotterdam has kind of remade itself as the most modern city in the Netherlands. It has some of the most spectacular architecture. It's the people from Rotterdam sometimes like to boast that this is Manhattan on the Meuse, because here this water that you're looking at is the Meuse River, and I know that all gets terribly complicated, and when you sail on the Dutch waterways, you will need to have your captain explain to you where you are, and it's going to make your head spin, because all these different bodies of water are connected to each other, and we play with that a lot on this cruise, so that altogether, if you want to be a stickler for names, you sail on about 7 rivers during this cruise between Holland and Belgium. But they're all connected. They're all part of the bigger Rhine, Meuse, Scheldt delta. So there are 3 big rivers with a lot of smaller little rivers in between. So then after Rotterdam, you return to Amsterdam at the end of the cruise. This is an image of the Anne Frank house, and I will pinpoint exactly which one it is. If you start at the corner, there's a rather large modern building. That is the annex to the Anne Frank house. It's where they have the museum and where they have a library and where they have a lot of facilities. And then move your sights to the next 2 buildings, the ones that are a little lower, and then you see a street light next to that tree. To the left of that tree is a street light. The building behind that street light, that is the house behind which the secret annex is, that Anne Frank and her family and 2 other families spend those years, those war years in, until they were eventually caught. Again, I mentioned this before, I'll say it again, get your tickets early, very early. As soon as you've booked your trip, book your Anne Frank tickets. Keukenhof. Keukenhof is what you do during tulip season. You will see tulips and daffodils and whatever other flowers happen to be in season in many other places, but you will not ever see them in such a concentrated form and in such incredible density and in so many beautiful colors as you see them in the Keukenhof. And the interesting thing here is that this, among other things, is a trade show. The Dutch export most of their flowers all over the world. Depending on the economics of the period. Last time I checked, maybe 5-6 years ago, the Dutch owned half of the world's cut flower market. So this is something that the Dutch do, and part of what this is of course to get hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world to look at this. It's also for tradespeople to look at new tulip species and to buy, and you can do this too. You have to be patient, because buying tulips in tulip season basically means that you get last year's tulips. So don't do it. In Keukenhof, you can pick up a little card, fill it out, and you'll get that year's tulip bulbs sent to your home. But you'll have to be patient, because you only put them in the ground in fall and then they come out in spring. So keep that in the back of your head. It's one of those things that is very hard to describe, Keukenhof. You have to go and see it. This is an alternative to Keukenhof. If you've been there before, or if you just want to do something a little different, this is the city of Haarlem, right next door to Amsterdam. I wouldn't say it's a mini Amsterdam, but it has some of the things that Amsterdam is known for. It has a beautiful old church. It has a lot of these streets with brick houses, intricate little brick houses. It also has a really interesting museum with a lot of Dutch masters. A museum dedicated to the work of Frans Hals, who was a bon vivant, who was a man who liked to drink a little bit. And if you look at his paintings, some of the old masters were kind of stern in how they painted, and Frans Hals was a lot of fun. A lot of people, it's a little like Jan Steen. The paintings exude an amount of joy and an amount of pleasure that is not so often seen in, for instance, the works that someone like Rembrandt did. So I would recommend going to see the collection of Frans Hals. But of course, you need the time. Okay, and so that kind of brings me to the end of this journey. This is a shot of Amsterdam. And I love this shot because it shows you what the Dutch do with the water. In the front, those are houses in the back, those are houses. Quite a few people live on these boats throughout the city, actually, and then the people in the back of this image, they have their little boats. They only have to walk across the street, make sure that they don't get run over by bicyclists, and then they can also be in the water. And you will see, especially on beautiful days, everyone is on the water. So this is the one thing that you must do in Amsterdam. You have to do the canal cruise that we include. Maybe you want to spend a little bit more time in the canals. And this is another beautiful shot. This is in fall, but it's a great shot of one of the quieter canals. This is why I say you need to walk and don't just stay where a lot of your fellow tourists will go. Just round the corner and walk into. Amsterdam is a safe city. You don't need to worry about getting into a bad neighborhood. You can walk in the old city and you can find these kind of places that are very tranquil, they're very quiet and just beautiful. And then the final image here is just to show you what a Dutch family looks like. And if you're on your bicycle to do grocery shopping, or your kids need to go to school and you have to drop off some mail at the post office, you mean business on your bicycle. And this is why I always say, if you want to ride a bicycle, do so in Hoorn, do so in the Hoge Veluwe at the Krullenmullen Museum in Arnhem. Don't necessarily try it in Amsterdam. Because Amsterdam, that's really for the professionals, the people that do this day in, day out, that carry their children and their groceries and their mail and their tennis rackets on their bicycles, and it goes quick. It's great fun, but only do that one if you have a lot of experience. Okay, and then at the end of this cruise, the final thing, and then I'll open up for questions as much as you like. We also offer you a trip to The Hague at the end of the trip. And in The Hague, you're very close to the coast. And this is actually where our king resides. And that's a little, it's a little unusual and it's a little strange. But Amsterdam is the capital city. The Hague is where the government is seated. And this is also where the king lives. It's a quirk, and it has everything to do with the political circumstances during the days that the Netherlands became a country. Essentially, the Counts of Holland, who were the rulers, the de facto rulers of the country, were not so happy with the rich merchants in Amsterdam. And that's why they decided that if they were to have the capital, the seat of government in Amsterdam, that would just be too much power in one city. So they decided to set up residence in The Hague. And The Hague has a very different atmosphere than most other cities. It's a little genteel. It's a little slow. It has a beautiful little museum that is probably best known for the Vermeer painting of the girl with the pearl earring. It has a seat of government, which is a beautiful building to look at. It also has this building. It's the International Peace Palace. You may remember the Yugoslavia tribunal. That all took place in The Hague, and this was a building that played an instrumental role in this. And you're not far from the beach. You could actually just spend an afternoon walking along the North Sea if the weather is good enough for this. Okay, so that kind of completes the bit about this particular itinerary.
Thank you, Joost. Our first question comes from Lizette, who is in Houston in the US. And she asks, will this cruise be okay for an 82-year-old woman with a rollator or a walker? Thank you.
Yes, I think you need to be prepared to not be able to participate as much as you would perhaps do without a rollator. But yes, I don't see why not. Getting on and off a ship is not a walk in the park, but as long as you're, and it all depends on what you use the walker for. My mom had a walker, and it still allowed her to go about 100 yards or so without having to sit down. If that's the situation, then you're okay. If it's more than that, then you'll have to you will really have to pace yourself during walking tours. And the Netherlands tend to be a country where you do a lot of walking. A lot of the smaller cities are not friendly to cars and certainly not friendly to coaches. So in order to make the most of it, you're better off if you're a little mobile. I don't see why you wouldn't want to travel just because you are a little mobility impaired.
And then you have a lot of the cobblestones in the old towns, you know, it might be a little difficult.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Mark, who is in Fort Lauderdale in the US. And he asks, well, he says, we are booked on the April 2023 Windmills itinerary. It will be our 14th cruise with Viking.
Wow.
And he has two questions for us. Will the tulips be out in April? And are there any days with scenic sailing, as that's always our favourite time when we're with Viking?
Splendid questions. So the tulips are out in April. The question is, where are they? In Keukenhof, no problem. Outside of Keukenhof, it's a little climate dependent. If you have a very harsh winter, early April, they might not all be out. If you're in the middle of April, yeah, it's no problem. And the scenic sailing part is a little bit more difficult. The distances are short, and we do spend an awful lot of time on shore. But you do have, I mean, when I think about it, going to Flanders, you have that day from Kinderdijk down to Antwerp, and that's actually quite nice.
That is a nice day. Yeah, you start in Arnhem in the morning and you sail the entire morning, and then you just have a rather short stop in Kinderdijk, and then you continue to sail again at 4 p.m. and then you get into Antwerp at 8 again in the next morning. Yeah, so you have the whole evening of sailing. Yeah.
Yep. So there's enough scenic. I mean, it's not like you have a full day, but there's enough on the margins that I think is really enjoyable. There's little cows on the dikes, and it's gorgeous.
It's lovely, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Paul, who's in LA in the US. And he says, we're going on your grand 15-day voyage starting in Budapest. Is your 10-day Amsterdam Tulips and Windmills different enough to do before the 15-day cruise? And is it close enough to combine them two together?
That all depends on when you're actually traveling from Budapest to Amsterdam, because the Tulips and Windmills only take place early in the season. It's roughly second half of March until about the first week of May, because then the tulips are over. No more tulips. So then you have to wait until the next year. We have another cruise in the Netherlands that does run through the year. So you would have to kind of puzzle it together. And if you were to want to combine them, I would book the tail end of the tulip season, end up in Amsterdam, and just stay on the ship, because the ships do kind of, after their final tulip run, there's a reasonable chance that one of the ships will just go south to Budapest.
And then you could stay even on the same. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do believe, though, to answer that question, I do believe that the itineraries are different enough. I think Tulip and Windmills is definitely different enough to be combined with the Grand Euro, because you don't have any duplicates. I mean, I think Kinderdijk is a duplicate, but that's the only one. And there we have multiple excursions on that day.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's all different.
In principle, it's a good idea.
Yeah. Also, because on the Grand European, the Kinderdijk is the only stop you have in the Netherlands, right? And then you get into Amsterdam, and unless you book the extension, you don't really get to see anything of the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Leslie, who is in Orlando in the US. And she says, I've never heard of Zealand until we booked this cruise for 2023. What would you recommend doing in our free time in that port?
The dirty little secret is that you don't have a lot of free time as you travel through Zealand. You stop, we take you off the ship, you travel through Zealand, you see the Delta works, and then towards the northern portion of the province, you end up back on the ship. So there isn't a lot of time to spend on your own. And that's, the Netherlands and Belgium together in 10 days, we have to make certain choices. If you ever want to come back to Zealand, I can highly recommend it. It has lots of tiny little towns and is great for bicycling. And it's actually the province in the Netherlands that New Zealand was named after.
And in fact, we do go to Veere on our tour. You know, you do have free time in Veere, which is one of the most beautiful little tiny towns that Joost was mentioning. I mean, there are several ones there, like Zierikzee, Veere, Middelburg. So probably you could spend a few days there, but yeah, we pick out the highlights and then show those to you. So Veere definitely is a pearl there, but we do go there.
And you have what? You have a half an hour there, so to just have
we're in the process of extending that.
Okay.
We're in the process of doing an option because we figured that, you know, some people really want to see the Delta works, others want to spend more time in Veere. So so we're trying to accommodate everyone's wishes.
Yeah. Good.
Perfect. Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Lee, who's in the US. A question not on this itinerary. But he says, we're going on the Amsterdam to Baal cruise in July 2022. What do you reckon the sailing temperatures would be when we go away?
In July is a warm month. It'll be in the mid 70s or so.
Yeah, that's what I'd say.
It's the warmest time of the year.
Yeah.
And again, you know, you're in a temperate climate in Europe, and that basically means that this is kind of a guideline. Don't be surprised in July if you have a little bit of rain. It's not unusual.
Bring layers.
Yes.
It always works.
Yes. And an umbrella. Well, we have umbrellas on the ship.
Yeah.
So you don't even need to worry about those.
But it can get quite hot in July, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Leon, who is in the US. And he asks, on this itinerary, how much time is spent at the Tulip Gardens?
A half a day. And you probably have options to extend that a little bit. If that's really what you want to do, you can spend a full day.
We have a full day or half a day indeed, and then you can extend to make it a full day. Some people prefer to just do it a half day and then they go on a tour to Haarlem, which is then the second half of the day. But generally the tour is from 8:30 until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so you have ample of time to really enjoy. Yeah. It's the highlight of the cruise. Everybody loves it all the time again.
Yeah, and then from Hoorn, you do the Tulips and Windmills, optional excursion, because that takes you through a lot of the fields where they actually grow tulips. The garden itself is there for show. Much of the rest of the Netherlands, and those are the pictures that you always see, you know, the aerial pictures. Those are fields where they grow commercial bulbs, and that's what you travel through on that Tulips and Windmills excursion.
And that's what you know from the pictures, and that's what it looks so beautiful sometimes when you fly into Amsterdam, you can see all the fields with the different colors, and that's really, really beautiful. But the guides, they always try to pass the fields whenever they can, because it's not that the same fields are in bloom the whole time, so you really need to be know where you go to be able to show those.
They're crops. They're just like any. They're grown for the bulbs. The flowers in those fields for the farmers are not important. And they do the exact same thing that you do in a wheat harvest. At some point, a combine goes over them and chops off the heads of all these flowers.
Yeah.
And then you can buy these strings of flower heads to put on your car. And they don't last very long, but it's, you know, but that's actually, it's the shocking part in the Netherlands. It's a dirty secret that we cut off all these flowers.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you both comes from Mario, who is in Dayton in the US. And he asks, will you be able to visit the Keukenhof Park during this trip?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's on that final day. Keukenhof is you know, it was in the presentation. It's the final day of, you know, you go there from Amsterdam. It's what we just talked about. Yeah.
We only operate these cruises during the opening times of Keukenhof. So sometimes then, even if it's on the last day, sometimes we switch it with the first day, if it's the end of the Keukenhof season. But that would only be on one sailing or two sailings.
Perfect. And our next question for you both comes from Carla, and it is another weather question for us. And she asks, what is the weather like during late April on this cruise?
Nice. Yeah, you're going into May, so it's pleasant. Should be pleasant. You'll have a little bit of rain, but the temperatures are nice. It never gets too hot. Favorite time of the year.
But it can get chilly too, Joost. I mean, the wind can be cold.
Lammetjes in de wei, koetjes in de wei. It's when all the animals start to come out. It's a beautiful time of the year.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but it's changeable. April doet wat hij wil.
Bring a sweater.
Absolutely. Always bring a sweater on our cruises, even if it is in the middle of the summer. Yeah. And our next question for you both comes from Barb, who's in Columbus. And she asks, why does Viking use the names Netherlands and Holland interchangeably?
That's a good one.
Because it's what the world does. Some people call it Holland, some people call it the Netherlands. And the guides, when you travel to this part of the world, the guides never get tired of explaining exactly to you what the difference between the two is. But feel free to use them interchangeably.
But Holland is just a little part of the Netherlands, right?
Now you're giving it away. Now you're basically, you know. And now the guides don't get to tell.
I spoiled the guide's story, but the guides elaborate a lot longer about it, and they will really go into the details and why and the history. I won't do that now.
Okay, all right. Holland is a part of the Netherlands, very important part of the Netherlands.
No spoilers from you two, please. And our next question comes from Bonnie, who's in New York, and she asks, can you change your excursion choices once you are already on the ship?
Yes, but it depends on when exactly you do it. If you make up your mind 2 hours before you travel, it may be that we need to charge you. In general, the whole purpose of having you on these excursions is that we help you tailor your journey. So if we can help you do something that in hindsight you think, or, you know, after closer observation or after listening to your program director, you think, well, this suits me better, then we'll make accommodations. In general, we'll make accommodations. In rare cases, if you have booked something and then you let us know very close in, we might have to charge you a cancellation fee.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Bud, who is in Grimsby in Canada. And he asks, why do all of the church steeples have a near vertical shaft mounted near the very top of the steeple?
Benjamin Franklin. It's basically it's a lightning rod. Really simple. It's a lightning rod. You're in an extremely flat country where for miles and miles and miles, churches with a metal cross on the top are the highest point in you know, for miles and miles around. So churches used to get lots of lightning strikes, and those metal rods basically take care of that.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you comes from Sarah, who's in Savannah in the US. And she asks, when is the best time in spring to see the flowers in their peak? Do all of these itineraries showcase the blooms in full?
Yes and no. I mean, when you go to Keukenhof, you have early tulips and you have late tulips, and you have early daffodils and late daffodils. In Keukenhof, they make very certain that they have, you know, there's something to see every week that the park is open. If you go out on the fields, if you're there in let's say in mid-April, you have tulips, but no hyacinths anymore. No crocuses. That is all very early in the season. So it all depends. You'll see some fields, you'll travel by some fields that are green and or even already completely plowed over and brown by now, that had crocuses and hyacinths 3 weeks ago.
And then it's always different year by year. You know, every year is different. Sometimes the tulips are in bloom very early in April, sometimes only later in April, or sometimes even already in March. So so the opening times of Keukenhof is a good orientation. Like what Joost says, there is always something to see during that period of time.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Andrea, who's in the US. And she asks, are excursions ever cancelled due to extreme weather on this cruise?
No.
Rarely.
When?
No,
I mean,
no.
seriously, when?
No.
Perfect. Very rarely then. And our next question for you comes from Mario, who is in the US. And he asks, the entrance to the Anne Frank Museum doesn't appear to be included in this trip. So should we book our own?
Yes. Book it now. Online. It's the only way you can do this. No, I'm deadly serious, actually. It's the Anne Frank House a long time ago has decided that they want to deal with individuals, not with operators, not with companies like ours, and they have good reasons for it. So the only way to obtain tickets is to go directly on their website. Don't wait and hope that it's going to happen on the day of, because it won't. Or you can get lucky after standing in line for maybe 2.5 hours, and that's just not what you want to do with your time.
Yeah, you want to book like 3 months ahead.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And it's all in English. I mean, you don't have to worry. It's very, very easy. They make it very easy.
Thank you very much. And our next question for both of you comes from Bonnie, who is in Chicago. It is a different Bonnie. And she says she hasn't travelled with Viking yet and is asking, how large is the ship on this itinerary?
The ship carries 190 guests, and these ships are quite intimate. They're relatively small. They have one restaurant, they have one lounge, they have a beautiful outside area, they have a sun deck, nice spacious cabins. Again, about 89 of them, and that's it. How long are they? They're
135 meters.
130. So okay, so it's about 430 feet. They're relatively small.
And they have the sun deck, which is a nice outside area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both. And our next question for you comes from Diane, who is in the US. And she asks, when is the end of the tulip season? And what happens to the ship at the end of the season? Does it go on to Budapest?
Correct. Yes. End of season is a kind of first week of May. Right around that time.
And then the ships go either down to Basel or to Budapest.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you both comes from Miriam, who is also in the US. And she asks, in Bruges, do they still show people making lace and other handcrafts?
Yes. I think it's getting a little less, though. What do you think, Irene? There's still ladies doing it in the streets.
You still see them. You still have these shops, but maybe not as many as in the past. But they're still around, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you both comes from Linda, who is in Portland in the US. And she asks, could you quickly please share a comparison between this itinerary and the Holland and Belgium itinerary?
Yeah, the biggest difference is really, we do this one only during tulip season, right? And then the other itinerary has a few places in it that are unique to that itinerary. Maastricht. You sail on a river that you don't sail on the Tulips and Windmills itinerary, the Meuse. And you take a canal through Belgium to get to Antwerp. So overall, between Nijmegen, Maastricht, more time in Antwerp, it's quite a different itinerary.
Yes, and you go to Dordrecht and to Rotterdam, so you do have quite a few different ports. Yeah.
Our next question comes from James, who's in New York in the US, and he asks, what food do you both think we should try
It's an acquired taste, but you should try the herring. The herring that you see this in the streets, especially in springtime. People eat herrings. You get them in a little paper tray with lots of chopped onions, and you lift it by its tail. It's a herring fillet. The tail is still attached, and you lift it up and you kind of let it glide in your gullet like this. And it's very much an acquired taste. Essentially, it's, you know, the Dutch, if they want to be cute about it, they call it Dutch sushi. But sushi is raw fish. Herring is actually fermented fish. But it's not nearly as bad as it sounds. It's nothing like some of the other bad fish dishes you could get. Give it a shot.
And if you're not into herring, you can try the kibbeling, which is also nice. That's a fried fish, but it's also delicious. You can buy it at the same stall as the herring.
And kibbeling is more middle of the road. It's not as acquired of a taste.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. And our next question comes from Judy, who is in Montreal in Canada. And she asks, if each of you could pick one 10-day period itinerary to go on, which date would you choose for the best experience with the tulips?
Second and third week of April.
Yeah.
Smack dab in the middle.
Yeah, then you have the biggest chance of getting the best.
Yeah. You'll catch a little bit of tulip harvesting, and you might still have the tail end of the early flowers, and then Keukenhof is always nice, but around the fields there's a lot more activity, I think, early on in the season.
Yeah, I agree.
Perfect, thank you very much. And our next question for you comes from Dawson, who is in the US, and they ask, if there is heavy frost in the spring, can the tulips suffer like other crops?
No, because they're still in the ground. So it would have to be extremely heavy frost, and that doesn't happen very often. Tulips are cold weather flowers. If you live in Phoenix, don't buy tulip bulbs in the Netherlands and think that anything is going to happen when you stick them in the ground in Arizona, because nothing will happen. These are cold weather flowers. Originally, tulips came from the mountains of Afghanistan and Turkey. So nope, nothing bad will happen to the tulips with a little bit of frost.
Perfect. Well, that's great to hear. And our next question for you both comes from Meryl, who is in Woodland in the US. And she asks, what type of food can I expect to experience while on this cruise?
On board, we just have a variety of food, and we will serve you local dishes a little adjusted to American tastes. And you will have some things that we always offer that are always there. We do want you to explore a little bit, and then outside of the ship, there are a host of different things that you can try. You have to be a little brave when it comes to the Dutch food that you get in the stores. All of it is either really salty, or a lot of it tends to have strong flavors. A lot of it has a lot of salt in it. You can get licorice, which a lot of Dutch kids love, and it's incredibly salty and it makes your eyes water. One of the things that you should try, and I know that most of you, especially in the US, will go like, "Oh God, that's disgusting," but you should try French fries and mayonnaise, because that's how the Dutch eat it, and it's better than ketchup. We talked about the herring. And then we will probably serve some of this on board. The Dutch are known they eat a lot of veggies, and especially early in the season, the Dutch traditionally around this time of year would still be eating winter veggies, because the summer veggies aren't quite there yet. So they would eat stomps, and I'm sure that they will have a nice, because stomp doesn't sound very sophisticated and elegant. I'm sure that on the ship, they will serve you something that reminds you a little bit of what a Dutch stomp would be. And those would always contain carrots, onions, potatoes, and some sort of a meat.
And you have the Dutch pea soup, which is also the soup is also very good. They have a Taste of Holland event, so you do definitely get to taste the local Dutch food on board of the ship, and that's always a really nice. The crew, they dress up in traditional Dutch clothes and they feed all the traditional food. But yeah, what Joost says. The other thing that I would definitely try, and you can see these stalls on the markets, they make these fresh syrup waffles. That's something everybody loves. Anytime when I go to Holland, I need to bring them back home. The stroopwafels, we call them.
And cheese, of course.
Yes.
And I'm going to get you know, there's going to be people in Holland very upset with me. Don't buy these little round red cheeses or the green cheeses or the blue cheeses that you can get at Schiphol Airport or even in the stores in Amsterdam. Buy a piece of cheese from a larger wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's good cheese.
That's good cheese.
Yes. And have a taste. You walk into a cheese shop and you ask to taste various different cheeses, and no one bats an eyelash. That is entirely normal, and that's how any Dutch person would do it.
Yeah.
You do that
taste before you buy.
Yes. Yes. The older the cheese, the saltier it is, the more flavor there is.
Thank you very much, both of you. Our next question for you is from Grace, who's in the US, and she asks, what sights will I see on the Amsterdam Canal Cruise excursion?
Houses, canals, and bridges. Amsterdam does not have big palaces, grand museums, and things like that. It has a few of these things, but where you cruise, you have these incredible 17th and 18th century homes of very wealthy people from Amsterdam, families that lived there for 2, 3, 4 generations until the money ran out. And that's what the canal cruise kind of focuses on. A lot of these buildings with beautiful facades. It's all in brick. You go under these little bridges. That's the whole experience. So it's hard to say, well, this is the big building that you will see here, and then you turn around the corner, and then there's this monument. That's not what the canal cruise is really about. But I mean, don't get me wrong. It's the best way to see Amsterdam.
Absolutely.
It's silly not to do it. It's the best way to see Amsterdam, and it is, and you will not be disappointed. It might not sound, you know, oh my God, I'm not going to see grand old buildings. Amsterdam's not Paris. Amsterdam has buildings on a very human scale.
But it makes you understand the history a lot better, I find. I do believe, because that's how Amsterdam started, right? I mean, the people that built the city, they started off with the canals, and that's how they moved around on the water. So this is really it gives you the best insight of the history of the city to travel the canals.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Danny, who is in Canada. And they ask, will we be allowed to bring tulip bulbs back to Canada in our luggage?
I have a much better idea. At Keukenhof in particular, but there are other places where you can also do this. You pay for bulbs that get sent to Canada at the point where it's time to plant them. What you buy in spring in the Netherlands are last year's bulbs. Because this year's bulbs are still in the ground. They haven't been harvested yet. So you're much better off. And this is what you can do at Keukenhof. You find something that you like, that you particularly like. And there are little cards, and you can write down those numbers, and you can order those specific tulips. And they will be sent to you. They will be sent to you at the time that these bulbs are harvested. That's, I think, the best way to do it. Having said that, yes, you can absolutely do it if it's just for fun. If you're not a purist, and if you're not like have this incredible garden in Canada that is the pride of the neighborhood, but just you just want to have some tulips. Yeah, you can go and buy these bags at Schiphol Airport that are made for export. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But the better way, I think, is having them shipped in around September. I think that's the harvest time, and then you can put them in the ground in October. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Laurie, who has posted on Facebook, and they ask, which river cruise would you recommend for a first-time Viking river cruiser?
You go first.
Well, I mean, probably I would say the Tulips Windmills because that's my favorite area to travel through. And I love that period of the year. I love the springtime. I love the flowers and all the small little Dutch towns. And so that I could actually recommend that one.
If you're not bound by season, I would go with the Rhine first. You know, Amsterdam, Basel. That could be your drug of entry.
I must admit, I do agree with Joost. Rhine getaway, definitely. Our next question for you comes from Mika, and she asks, what about eating smoked eel or paling? Could that happen on this cruise?
Yes, Mika, it could. How are you? No, it absolutely could. Acquired taste too, Mika. Not everyone likes paling. We do it. In the Taste of Holland, we normally have paling.
You usually have the smoked paling there.
Yeah. Used to be an enormous business. There were whole villages that had nothing but smoke houses for eel.
For eel.
Yeah.
Around the IJssel Lake, right? The Zuider Sea. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you comes from Scott, who is in Grapevine in the US. And he says he just returned from a Viking French cruise, but couldn't get hold of that sweater you're wearing, Joost. Is there any other way to get hold of them?
Yes. So these are made by a company called Dale in Norway. D-A-L-E, Dale of Norway, if you will. And they have them. You can order them online.
There we are. And our next question for you both comes from Sean, who is in Portland in the US. And he asks, can I hire a bike for the duration of this cruise?
And bring it on the ship with you?
For the duration of the cruise, well, you can hire a bike in each port. I think that will be easier. Right, because otherwise, I mean, we haven't had that situation, and you would have to transport it on board of the ship. There's not really room for that. But we do have bike rides that we offer, several of them. One in the Veluwe, one around Kinderdijk. There's like 3 bike rides that are organized on the cruise, and in other places, I mean, there are rental places everywhere in every town in Holland, and it's easy to rent them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also nice to go on the guided rides.
I wouldn't schlep the bike along on the ship. It's just not very practical.
Yeah.
And in Hoorn, for instance, I wouldn't ride a bike. I would just walk.
Yeah.
In town. And even there, if that's what you want to do in the afternoon, you can just walk to the train station and rent a bike there.
Yeah.
It is really renting bicycles in the Netherlands everywhere is ridiculously simple.
It's very easy. And then, I mean, we do have like 3 organized bike rides that we offer as well.
Yep.
Thank you very much, both of you. And our next question comes from Cameron, who is in the US. He says, I'm interested in visiting various World War I and World War II cemeteries. Apart from Flanders Field, would it be possible for Viking to help me plan this?
Let's see. So in the Netherlands, you do. Sorry, Irene. We go to the airborne cemetery in Arnhem, correct?
We go to the airborne cemetery in Arnhem, yeah. But that's the only one, and then we have Flanders Fields. So these are the 2 ones that we already have in the itinerary.
Then the only the bigger one in the Netherlands is in Margraten, which is in the south. That's a trek. That's. I mean, we could organize it, but you would spend hours in a car getting there.
Yeah.
So if you do the airborne cemetery near Arnhem, the only other thing that you could do is go to the Wageningse Berg. But that's a little tricky because public transportation is not so great in that particular area. But basically going to the airborne cemetery, that's all kind of in the same theater of war. So between those 2, I think you have a pretty decent sampling of what there is. A lot of cemeteries for World War I, of course, are in Belgium. because the Dutch were neutral in that war, and there aren't any cemeteries on Dutch soil. And where else do we have? I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on Holland and Belgium, when we go to Maastricht, we go to Margraten.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both. And our next question comes from James, who is in the US, and he asks, how much walking is there at the Netherlands Open Air Museum? He says he's heard it's a very, very large museum.
Yeah, but you can do a lot without walking for miles and miles and miles. It's not that bad. You think it's that bad, Irene?
No, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, it depends on how much you really want to walk. It is a large museum, yes, but yeah. But I wouldn't say it's not. I mean, the whole cruise, it is a lot of walking. I mean, all the tours are walking, right?
Yeah. I think in the museum, if you end up walking 3 miles to see everything, that would be a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. And our next question comes from Heather, who is in the US, and she asks, what languages do they speak in this area?
Dutch.
Netherlands, Dutch, Flemish, which is almost the same, right? I mean, the written language is the same, but the pronunciation is very different.
Yeah. It's all one language. Doesn't help.
No.
Because the people in the north and the people in Flanders will not necessarily, if they speak thick dialects, they don't quite understand each other.
No, but it's the same language, yeah.
Perfect. Go on, Irene.
No, I was just saying it's a Germanic language. It's similar. I mean, some words are the same, like English. Like there are quite some overlaps, but yeah, some German words. So it's a bit of a little bit of everything. We have some from some French words, right? And then we have this typical Dutch twist to it, which makes it hard to understand sometimes.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Scott, who is in the United States. And he asks, what flowers would I see at Keukenhof Gardens? Is it only tulips?
Nope. It's all kinds of bulb flowers. It's a wild variety of things. No, it's not just tulips.
Daffodils, hyacinths, crocuses, right?
Irises, all kinds of wild things. No, seriously, not just... They have some hot houses where they do exotic bulbs. It's everything basically that is a bulb flower. So, way more.
And our next question for you comes from Norbert, who is in St. Louis in the United States. He says, I'm a florist coming on this cruise next year, but what are both of your favourite flowers?
Our favorite flowers, my personal favorite flowers.
Yes.
I think I would go for primroses. Sorry, I like tulips though. I do actually like tulips a lot. I like the ones that, and they're bringing those back. The ones that that were in tulip mania. In the 17th century, and when the Dutch spent fortunes on a single bulb, they had these very interesting colors, and they're bringing those back. Those are gorgeous. Those are beautiful.
I have to admit, my favorite flowers are tulips. I love them. It's like the sign winter is over when the first tulips come out, and then it's like, I love that. Yeah.
Yes. And you know, it's and people spend inordinate amounts of money on flowers. The Dutch do. It's literally of all people in the world, the Dutch spend the most money per capita on flowers.
And they have beautiful flower shops. I mean, they have like the nicest flower shops I know in Holland.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And our next question for you is from Tatiana, who is in the US. And she asks, are all drinks included on Viking River cruises?
Most drinks are included.
During the meals, wines and beers are included. I mean, during the drinks you can, during the meals you can order, but then I think you have the Silver Spirit package, which then includes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. And speaking about drink, I've got a question here about food. Pretty much the same question, to be honest. I've got a question from Mackenzie, who is in Morgantown in the US, and he asks, is all food included when traveling with Viking?
Yes. As much as you like, essentially. No, 3 meals a day and little snacks and things like that. No, it's all included.
Yeah. And there was a 24-hour coffee and tea station with cookies, different types of homemade cookies that are always available, and then you have your 3 meals. Absolutely. So yeah.
Lovely. And our next question comes from Joe, who's in Hillsborough in the US, and they say, what cabin would you both recommend I book to come on this cruise? I was thinking about booking a French balcony, but I'm torn between having the French balcony and the full balcony.
That's a good question. It really depends on how much time you will want to spend in the cabin, right?
Balconies are nice to sit outside. They're more expensive. I mean, this is really this is such a personal thing. You know, I recently I've done a lot of the work on and cruised on the ocean ships, and sitting outside on a balcony in the evening is lovely. And it's just absolutely lovely. So I would lean a little bit towards doing it that way. But a French balcony, you know, just you open the doors and you bring in, especially again in the evenings, you bring in, you know, a little bit of extra sunshine and the temperature and things like that. I think that you cannot go wrong with either.
No, I agree.
Thank you very much. And our next question comes from Alan, who is in Springtown in the US. And he asks, how far is the ship from Amsterdam city centre? He says he's assuming I will be able to walk from the ship to the city centre.
Depends a little bit on where the ship is docked, but generally, and city centre is, you would have to kind of define what that is. It never takes you more than about a 20-minute walk to get into where it gets really interesting. And even, you know, the 20 minutes walk from the ship is not, it's never quite bad. If you're not a big walker, you can usually hop on the closest tram. Get yourself a day pass for the tram. I think that's always a good idea. Even if you're mobile, you know, cut off little bits and pieces by riding the tram for a few stops and then getting out and walking again. That's how I would do it. But you're never that. Amsterdam is just not that large. On very, very, very rare occasions, it happens that the ship is a little further outside of town, but then we will bring you into town with a shuttle bus. But that's rare. That's rare.
That's rare. Most of the time you can walk it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And our next question has just come in, and it is going to be our last question, as it is all we have time for today. It's from Chad, and he is in San Diego in the US. And he asks, what type of cabins are there available to book for this cruise? He says, is it different from the Rhine getaway ships?
No. Scott, if that was the last question you had, no. That's we can't make more out of it. The ships are identical. Same ships.
Yep. Same ships.
Exact same. We can't make anything more out of it.
And that's it. And that's all we have time for today.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Irene, was great. We'll do that again.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching. And we'll see you again soon on a Wanderlust Wednesday.